Paris Perspective.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Paris Perspective with me, David Coffey. Now, 13 years after holding the previous European presidency, France has once again taken the helm of the Council of the European Union for the next 6 months. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron will be charged with finding common ground amongst the EU's 27 member states on several key issues, including hot potatoes such as migration and defence, under a motto that can loosely be translated as Relaunch, Strength, Belonging. Now, to discuss France's chairmanship of the EU Council until the end of June, I'm joined in the studio today on Paris Perspective with Yves Bertoncini, who's the president of the Mouvement Européen France and former director of the Jacques Delors Institute here in Paris. Yves, it's great to see you again.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, let's go straight into one of those hot potatoes that I mentioned there. The reform of the 1985 Schengen Agreement, which allows for the free movement within Europe, is going to be a top priority with regards to a common EU approach to migration. Now, Macron recently met with his political opposite, Viktor Orban, in Budapest recently. Do you think France can find common ground with the likes of Hungary on such thorny issues such as migration?
Well, I believe migration is the issue, not Schengen. Schengen is only a tool. Of course, it's a space, free movement of people, but the challenge is migration. On one hand, there might also be other challenges in terms of security, terrorism. But if we focus on migration, the divide in Europe, you mentioned Mr. Orban, but let's mention the Germans, is in the perception of the migrants. For some Europeans, migrants are victims.
Yes.
To be backed and to be welcomed. Not all of them, but a part of them. And for Mr. Orban and some other leaders, migrants are threats. So as long as you have such a divide in the perception of the migrants, it's very difficult to find a common ground, except on the fact that you need to control the external borders of the Schengen area. Mm-hmm. Because to see if migrants can join us or not, you need to check. You need border checks. So on this, at least, you can have a consensus in Europe, including between Mr. Macron and Mr. Orban. But on the fact that once you have taken back control on the flows, you accept the migrants on Europe's soil, there the divide will remain. And the Germans were very open. The new coalition in Germany is very, very open to migrations. Mr. Orban will remain very, very opposed, including because for him it's a political trick.
Of course.
Because the reality is that no migrants want to settle in Hungary, but he wants, his interest is to show that, well, there might be an invasion. And I'm afraid that France is in the middle, because France and Mr. Macron is not extremely clear. He's not as clear as the Germans as regard migrations. And of course, is not as opposed as Orban, so we'll see what compromises he can try and obtain.
And he has to play to the populist front as well, and Orban himself is playing to that same front because he's coming up for election in April this year as well as Macron. As
this is also the common point.
And of course we have a lot of those European states and in the Mediterranean who are very much on the front line of the migration issue, who feel completely and utterly abandoned by the strategy in Brussels. So indeed, we shall see if common ground can be found there over the next 6 months. But on other issues which are central to this mandate of the European Council presidency is, well, defence. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has tabled several objectives ahead of a proposed summit of European leaders in the coming months. And now, the last time France held the rotating EU presidency back in 2008, the last half of 2008, the dialogue was dominated by relations with Russia over its intervention in the Georgian province of South Ossetia back in the time. Now, could the same thing happen again, repeat itself, over Russia's buildup of troops on the border with Ukraine?
Yeah, you're right to underline that for any rotating presidency of the EU, you have a very consistent program, and then facts can lead the presidency. So it's difficult to predict. Mr. Sarkozy, back in 2008, it was a presidency struck by crisis, the economic and financial crisis.
Lehman Brothers collapse,
the invasion
indeed.
of Georgia. Plus, there was even a constitutional no in a referendum in Ireland. So you don't know exactly what could happen. By the way, Mr. Macron has already to face the pandemic crisis. And what may happen in Russia, you don't know. In Russia, in Ukraine this time, you don't know. And Mr. Macron would have to face this and to try and find a compromise in Europe, a hard stance probably, together with the Americans. And I want to insist on this because, European defense is a let's say a holy cause in France for decades. And including when the General de Gaulle was there, and this, of course, has a link with Russia because there are threats, and Russia is one of them. This also concerns our relations with the USA.
Sure.
And I believe Mr. Macron has made the right move recently to show that, we'll try and have a more consensual European approach, more commitment from the Europeans, but in connection with the Americans, and even more precisely in connection with the NATO summits to be organized at the end of this spring, so at the end of the French presidency.
Sure.
So as long as he says, we are going to try and strengthen the European pillar of the Atlantic Alliance. This is a common ground. But every time he gives the impression that he wants to have more strategic autonomy, to try and let the Americans go away. This is very, very scary for all our partners in Europe. So he has to find the good words to assert that, yes, including because our American allies agree with this, the Europeans should do more. But not to try and impose a French leadership when actually the Europeans are much more at ease with the American one.
With American leadership. Now, indeed, looking at, France itself, there was a lot of fanfare, a lot of brouhaha has been given to the French presidency of the EU, and especially in the French media. Why actually is that? I mean, at the end of the day, you're mentioning there that the EU are more comfortable with the American side of things rather than a French policy being directed. The rotating presidency of the EU is essentially a chairmanship role. What is what France is setting on the agenda? Is it actually groundbreaking?
Well, there are expectations in France, simply, as regards Europe. Many European peoples are quite okay with the EU as it is today, more or less. But in Germany, for example, I believe the Germans, roughly speaking, they're quite okay with Europe as it is, even if, of course, you can reform Europe. Emmanuel Macron was elected by many Europhile voters at the first round, but he said immediately, I'm going to reset Europe, the Renaissance. So now he's recently just said more modestly, a turning point, something to reshape or something like this. So there are expectations. You have, of course, the role of the president, even if paradoxically enough, he is not the president of anything, Mr. Macron, because now we have a permanent president of the European Council named Charles Michel. Yes. But of course, he will give the impulsion, and he was elected on a very ambitious European program. So that's why there is you mentioned fanfare, at least an attention given to this in France, because since he has been elected based on a very ambitious program, by the way, under the Ode to Joy, the Ode to Joy at the Louvre, the anthem. So now he has to deliver, and he delivered a bit, but of course he wants to use this presidency to obtain more. And he will be assessed on this point as well. So hence the public attention, at least of the inner cycles. And of course, Frau Merkel is no longer at the helm of Europe as the de facto kind of vanguard of everything European. So with Merkel out of the way, the spotlight is very much on Macron. But also, there's a certain importance, I would say, because France is a founding EU member, a French presidency is more important than, say, a Czech or an Irish or a Portuguese presidency, potentially. Well, with all due respect, yes, it's probably true, since, the countries are there, all the member states, the experience, the means, political, administrative means, and again, for France, ambitions for Europe. You know, the projection, the French projection to Brussels is also an echo of our malaise, our national malaise, because we want to change France, we want to change Europe. I think many people would like to change the world or to have another world. So
high ambitions.
there is a malaise, and of course, you can also do positive things for negative reasons. So you have this French push, not only during the presidencies, by the way. It's all now the presidencies. It's every other 13 years.
That's
so
right.
no, but now even more that. Well, the world is changing. I believe that, by the way, the world is becoming a bit more consistent with traditional French views on Europe, stronger together, a more political Europe, not only free trade, free movement of people, trying to reshape Europe to be more assertive on geopolitical issues, on trade. So I believe Macron in this context can use, the new context to push forward some traditional French positions, under the condition that it doesn't believe that Europe could be a France in bigger.
Yes.
Europe can be a bit more French, but it can't be a France in bigger.
Well, this kind of leads me to my next point. On the 1st of January, various monuments around the country were illuminated in what I call a European blue. That it's a very striking dark blue, to mark, of course, the beginning of the presidency. But the Arc de Triomphe here in Paris was framing a massive European flag under its arch, and that caused an outcry from France's right wing. Now, we can see coming into the election year that souverainisme, that this type of French nationalism is really, on the rise here in the country in the run-up to the elections. Is this kind of rise in souverainisme, which is a hard word to nail in the English language, is this coming to the detriment of European unity, especially after the reaction that we saw to that flag up in the Arc de Triomphe?
Well, but first of all, I want to say that this presidency in an electoral context is detrimental for Europe. This should have been avoided. We should have postponed, or I don't know, but it's unfortunate.
Would the legislature have allowed that? Would the Senate of the National Assembly
could have been pushed forward? It could have been possible. But Mr. Macron decided to maintain this calendar, and then the reactions you have mentioned are also the traduction of this, because he becomes a target on European affairs as in any other ones. Even if he could do positive things, he would be targeted negatively by his opponents. So in this precise affair, I would say putting blue flags everywhere. But first, I believe it's very positive and it's welcome to put, the Eiffel Tower in blue and to show that we're citizens of France and Europe. So the problem with the Arc de Triomphe was a bit more specific, because it was a flag where French people are used to see a French flag or nothing. There was a European flag, which for me is fine, but some thought this flag has nothing to do with this. These are the nationalists, you said sovereignists. Yeah. You can say nationalists. Yes, yeah. And I disagree with them. But there was another reaction. By the way, not only nationalists from the extreme right, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the radical left, said this flag has nothing to do under the Arc de Triomphe. But some said, well, yes, this flag is welcome, but there should have been the French flag. And by the way, that's the official use of the two flags, the twofold citizenship.
Sure.
Valérie Pécresse said this. I think many French people would have been a bit more at ease with the use of two flags. And then if the nationalists don't agree with the European flag, yes, you can answer them more, let's say, strengthfully than when you have diverse opposition to the only use of the European flag.
Is there such a thing as an extreme pro-European person who could have interpreted the flag being under the Arc de Triomphe as French dominance over Europe like it was 200 years ago?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're a non-French observer. I had not this in mind, because maybe it's natural for French people, by the way, to lead Europe, so it was not... But you're right. It was probably maybe the intention. The most negative aspect is also that this flag has been removed very rapidly.
Yes, it was taken down instantly. Yeah.
Very rapidly, you know, and this is a shame, because either you put it, you assume you have done this and you maintain the flags a bit more, or or not. But so at the end of the day, I'm afraid this controversy has made has fueled many frustration. The only positive point is that at least it has showed a broader audience that yes, the French authorities were taking the lead in Europe for 6 months.
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough. Possibly the wrong message put out there. We're taking it down. But let's look a little bit further abroad. That's also on the French agenda in the European Union over the next 6 months. And that is an EU-Africa summit. It's also on the cards in the coming months. Now, of course, France's colonial history on the continent and current military engagement in the Sahel, one can understand the importance of Africa when it comes to France, especially at home. But what is going to be on the agenda on a EU-Africa level? I mean, of course, we know that education, investment will be there on the face of things. But in the corridors, will it be looking for more EU support for the military in the Sahel, more pressure on African countries to keep migrants at home? What about the spread, of course, of the Russian influence in Africa under the aegis of the Wagner mercenary group? And, of course, China. So what do you think is going to happen at that summit?
Well, you have started by the geopolitical, let's say, issues. I agree with your list. I would add on top of it the pandemic crisis, because we're dealing with the Omicron virus, and this comes from South Africa, and there's a need to show more solidarity to African countries, because as long as this virus will spread all over the world, it will come back on Europe.
Unless everybody is vaccinated.
So I think this will be there. On top, the more solidarity, more in Africa, more vaccine, but also more vaccination, trying to cooperate with them better. You have, the development of Africa, because Africa is there with a demography which is very good for economy, as long as the condition, the frames are there to allow this economic development, which would be beneficial for the Europeans. But you're right to underline that there are many geopolitical priorities, and you have mentioned security. Yes, Sahel, terrorism, migration is there as well. And I believe France, and it's a good illustration of what is a presidency in terms of setting the agenda. Of course, France will try and convince its European partners to do more with Africa, to get involved, not to leave Africa under the influence of hostile powers. And yes, to try, even it's very challenging, but to try and take the most of this relation. Africa is there to stay. We are Europe, so we have to take care of Africa. No, it's not taking care, by the way. We have to deal with Africa as well as the Americans have tried to deal with South America.
As our neighbor.
Of course, and it's the same in Asia with China, Japan, even if it's quite a different context.
Now, back to more local hotspots and spats closer to home here in France and, of course, the UK. Ironically and coincidentally, France's presidency of the European Union came exactly 1 year to the day after Brexit. And of course, that was the last time that we saw each other, Yves. Macron and Boris Johnson openly do not get along at this stage. I mean, you have this fisheries and fishing license war between the UK and France that remains unresolved. How do you think that France's EU presidency will be viewed by London, or whether it'll even be viewed or acknowledged at all by London at this stage?
Well, it's going to be difficult. It will remain difficult as long as, the Brexit is not exactly positive, I believe, if I want to be, let's say, as neutral as possible. But I've seen that even the Telegraph is trying to have doubts on what is Brexit. And as long as in France you have an election, and it's fair to say that the UK is not very popular in France, so it's easy for Macron and even others to play the cards of being anti-English, I would even say, not British. On top of this, you also have very, very precise challenges. Migrations. I mean, people have died in the Channel. You have So this is not only Brexit. You have had, of course, the Northern Irish Protocol. You have, what could be a cooperation in geopolitical issues, but transform into a confrontation when dealing with the selling of submarines to Australia. So there would be a need to find more common grounds, because, by the way, France and the UK are two very important, powerful countries, member of the UN Permanent Security Council. But I'm afraid it won't happen in the next month. Yes, because the situation is too negative on both sides.
Yeah.
And there are, yes, political pressure on the leaders. What France will do at the European level is to try and be assertive as regards the Brits. Mm-hmm. But the positive thing is that there will be other countries a bit more open. And so I think this will strike a good balance as regards the European position.
And finally, Yves, I mentioned the motto earlier, Relaunch, puissance, appartenance, like, relaunch, strength and belonging. But in the grand scheme of things, now this has nothing to do with the French presidency, in the grand scheme of things, do you really think that 6 months is enough time to find compromise among 27 EU member states for any country at the helm of the chairmanship of the EU?
Well, 6 months is enough, provided you have limited ambitions. You have some regulations, directives on their way. So, for example, the Digital Market Act might be adopted under the French presidency. The idea to have minimum wages in all the countries. Why should it be adopted? Simply because it has been prepared. So you're right to say it's a process, a long process. In average in Europe, you need 2 years, 2 years and a half to have a legal adoption. But to prepare this, you need to have political compromises. So France will obtain some final legislative decisions on some topics. Yeah. On some others, it will rather be a political declaration of intent.
Of intent, yes.
So, and of course, Macron will try to gather the most important decisions he wants to obtain, just to illustrate, not that this is going to reset Europe in 6 months, because it's impossible, and by the way, it's not useful, in my view, but that he tried to improve Europe consistently with what he had announced long ago when he was elected.
And put a feather in his cap at the end of his mandate at the helm of the EU. Yves Bertoncini, President of the Mouvement Européen France and former Director of the Jacques Delors Institute here in Paris. Thank you very much for being on Paris Perspective today. And thank you for watching today. And remember, you can always access Paris Perspective's editions on rfienglish.com/podcasts and indeed in audio on wherever you can get your podcasts or find your podcasts. For me, David Coffey, have a happy new year, and Paris Perspective will be back in 2 weeks' time.